Here's something that surprises nearly everyone opening this framework for the first time. There are no maturity levels, no level 1 to level 5, no score. If you've come from cybersecurity maturity models or CMMI, that absence feels like a mistake, like someone forgot a chapter. It wasn't forgotten. NIST considered it and deliberately left it out. And once you understand why, you understand the entire philosophy of this framework. So let me ask you this. If I told you an organization was at level 4 AI maturity, what would you actually know about their risk? Honestly, nothing. You wouldn't know what their systems do, who they affect, or what happens when they are wrong. Maturity scores measure process, not exposure. In this chapter, we go under the bonnet. You learn the two-part structure of the framework and why it's split that way. The four core functions and how they actually relate, which is not the linear cycle most people assume. The AI lifecycle and the actors across it. Why NIST insists AI is socio-technical rather than merely technical. And what a risk-based approach means when your risk is genuinely hard to measure. Get this chapter right, and everything after it clicks into place. Get it wrong, and you'll spend a year building a compliance spreadsheet that tells you nothing. Let's open it up. So, the framework comes in two parts, and honestly, the way people treat these two parts tells me a lot about how their program will go. Part 1 is called Foundational Information. It covers how to frame risk, what harms look like, the challenges of measurement, and the trustworthy characteristics. No actions, no subcategories, just thinking. Part 2 is the core. 4 functions, categories, subcategories. This is where you find the outcomes to work towards. Now, which part do you think people read? Right, Part 2, every time. Part 1 gets skimmed because it looks like preamble, like the throat clearing before the real document. Let me tell you why that's backwards. I worked with a team who'd implemented dozens of subcategories diligently. Beautiful documentation. And when I asked them, what harm are you actually preventing here? For whom? They couldn't answer. They'd done part 2 without part 1. They had activity without purpose. Part 1 is where you learn what risk means in this context. Part 2 is what you do about it. Skip part 1 and part 2 becomes bureaucracy. So here's my advice. Read part 1 twice. It's short. It's the part that changes how you think. And thinking is the thing that transfers to problems the document never anticipated. Alright, the 4 functions. This is the skeleton of the framework, so let's get it clear. Govern. This is your culture, policies, roles, accountability, risk strategy. Who decides? Who's answerable? What's our appetite? Map. This is context and discovery. What is this system? What's it for? Who does it affect? What could go wrong? Map is where you build understanding before you build anything else. Measure. Analysis and testing. How well does it work? How do we know? What are the metrics and what do they miss? This is where TEVV lives. Testing, evaluation, verification, and validation. Manage. Action. Treat the risks, allocate resources, monitor continuously, respond to incidents, and eventually decommission. Now, a useful way to hold these. Map asks what could go wrong. Measure asks how bad is it really. Manage asks what are we doing about it. And govern asks who says so and by what authority. Here's the one thing I want you to notice. 3 of those functions are about systems. 1 is about the organization. Govern is different in kind, not just in sequence. And that difference is the whole point, as we'll see next. So now the important bit, and the bit most people get wrong. How do the 4 functions actually relate? If you look at the NIST diagram, you'll see govern in the center, with map, measure, and manage arranged around it. That placement is deliberate and it's not decoration. Govern is cross-cutting. It doesn't come first in a sequence and then finish. It runs through everything continuously. When you're mapping context, governance decides who's in the room. When you're measuring, governance decides what threshold counts as acceptable. When you're managing, governance decides who signs off. So govern isn't step one. It's the operating environment for the other three. Now the other three. Are they sequential? Sort of, but not rigidly. Yes, you generally map before you measure because you need to know what you're measuring and why. And you generally measure before you manage because treating a risk you haven't sized is guesswork. But it loops constantly. Your monitoring and manage detects drift, which sends you back to measure. Your measurement reveals a risk nobody had mapped, so back to map. Your context changes, new regulation, new market, and everything reopens. I describe it as a spiral rather than a circle. You keep coming round, but each pass you know more. That's the honest picture. Now let's talk about the thing that's missing. There is no maturity model here, no level 1 through 5, and people find that genuinely unsettling. I get it. Maturity models are comforting. They give you a number, you can put it on a slide, you can show improvement. But let me ask you the honest question. If I say we're at level 3 AI maturity, what have I told you? Do you know what my systems do? Who they affect? What happens when they fail? No. You know I have some processes. That's all. NIST's position, and I think they're right, is that maturity measures process while risk lives in context. A tiny startup with one high-stakes medical model might need far more rigor than a large enterprise with 50 low-stakes internal tools. A single score flattens that distinction and hides it. So what did they give us instead? Profiles. A profile is the framework applied to your specific use case, sector, or context. You have a current profile, which is where you actually are, and a target profile, which is where your risk context says you need to be. The gap between them is your program. See the difference? A maturity score compares you to everyone. A profile compares you to what you actually need. That's a better question. So let's talk about the life cycle, because this is where you learn that risk isn't created where you think it is. NIST describes the AI life cycle in stages. Plan and design, where you decide what to build and why. Collect and process data. Build and use the model. Verify and validate. Deploy and use. Operate and monitor. And eventually, decommission. Now here's my question for you. At which stage is most risk created? Most people say the model. Wrong. Most risk is created in the first two stages, plan and design, and data. And most risk is discovered in the last two, operate and decommission. That gap between where risk is born and where it's found is the entire problem. Think about the healthcare algorithm we discussed, using spending as a proxy for need. That decision was made in plan and design by people in a meeting, probably in 10 minutes. The harm surfaced years later in production, affecting millions. Nobody in the model building stage could have caught it. The model was excellent at predicting spending. The flaw was upstream. So here's the practical implication. If your AI governance only kicks in at pre-deployment review, you're arriving after the risk is baked in. You're inspecting the cake for eggs. Governance has to start at the whiteboard. So who's involved? NIST uses the term AI actors, and it's deliberately broad. Think about who touches an AI system. There's the person who decided to build it, usually a business owner with a target. The people who source the data scientists, the engineers who deployed it, the people who use its outputs day to day, the auditors, the legal team. And then there's a group NIST insists on including, which many organizations forget entirely. The affected individuals. The person whose loan was declined. The candidate who never got the call. They didn't choose to interact with your model, and they may not even know it exists. Now here's the interesting bit. Notice how the technical people, the ones everyone thinks of as owning AI risk, are a small slice of that list. I ran a workshop once where I asked a room, who owns AI risk here? Everyone looked at the data science lead, and that poor man had no control over what data he was given, what objective he was handed, or how the output was used downstream. He owned about 10% of the risk and 100% of the blame. That's the pattern the actor concept is designed to break. Risk is distributed, so accountability has to be mapped explicitly across the whole chain. Alright, here's the concept I'd choose if I could only teach you one thing from this entire framework. AI is socio-technical. What does that mean? It means an AI system isn't just the model. It's the model plus the data it learned from, plus the humans who use it, plus the organization it sits in, plus the society it affects. Change any of those, and the system behaves differently, even if the code is identical. Let me give you a concrete example. Same model, two hospitals. In one, the clinicians treat its output as a suggestion and challenge it regularly. In the other, they're overworked, so they click accept. Identical technology, completely different risk profile. Which one did you test? The model. But the risk lived in the human layer. Or think about that sepsis alert I mentioned. The model worked, the nurses stopped listening because of alert fatigue. Is that a model failure? A workflow failure? An organizational failure? It's all of them at once, and you can't separate them. So here's what this means for you practically. If your AI assessment is a technical exercise done by technical people, you're assessing a fraction of the system. You need the operators, the affected parties, the business owners in the room. The technology is the easy half. So what does risk-based actually mean? Because the phrase gets used until it means nothing. Here's the plain version. Not everything deserves the same scrutiny. Effort should follow consequence. Think about your own organization. You've probably got an AI tool that summarizes internal meeting notes, and you might have a model that decides who gets a mortgage. Should those go through the same review? Obviously not. One is an inconvenience if it's wrong. The other alters someone's life. Risk-based means you triage. Higher stakes, more rigor. Lower stakes, lighter touch, get out of the way. Now, why does this matter so much? Because the alternative fails in both directions. Treat everything heavily and you strangle the business. Teams rout around you and shadow AI appears. Treat everything lightly and something serious slips through. I've seen both. The first is more common, honestly. Governance teams that apply a 40-question assessment to a chatbot that answers holiday policy questions. Within 6 months, nobody tells them about anything. NIST's classic risk formula is likelihood times impact, but be careful here. With AI, likelihood is genuinely hard to estimate and impact often falls on people outside your organization. So my advice? Start with impact on people. Who gets hurt and how badly? Let that drive your rigor. So let's separate two words people use interchangeably because the distinction actually matters. Risk appetite is strategic. It's the amount of risk you're willing to accept in pursuit of your goals. It's set at the top by the board and it's broad. Something like, we will not deploy AI in decisions affecting patient safety without a clinician in the loop. That's appetite. Risk tolerance is operational. It's the specific threshold. Our model's false negative rate on fraud must not exceed a stated level, and if it does, we halt and review. That's tolerance, measurable, actionable. Appetite is the philosophy. Tolerance is the tripwire. Now here's where organizations struggle, and I've seen this repeatedly. They write beautiful appetite statements, full of words like responsible and ethical, and they never translate them into tolerances. So when a model starts degrading, nobody knows whether it's crossed a line because no line was ever drawn. Here's my test for you. Ask your team, at what number do we switch this model off? If you get a confident answer with an actual figure, you have tolerance. If you get, well, it depends, you have a wish. And notice, NIST says the hardest part is that risk tolerance is highly contextual. There's no universal answer, which means somebody in your organization has to decide. That's governance. So let's finish this chapter with humans because everyone puts a human in the loop and almost nobody makes it work. Here's the honest reality. Human in the loop is often theater. Somebody is nominally reviewing, but they have 4 seconds per case, no context, no authority to override without justifying themselves, and the model is right 97% of the time. What do you think they do? They approve. Every time. That's not oversight, that's a rubber stamp with a job title. So, what makes oversight real? 3 things, and I'd hold you to all 3. Capability. Does the person actually understand the output well enough to challenge it? A loan officer who can't see why the model declined can't meaningfully review it. Authority. Can they override without punishment? If overriding triggers an investigation and agreeing never does, you've built a machine that produces agreement. And time. Genuinely, do they have the minutes required? Automation bias is real and it's strongest under time pressure. Think about aviation. Autopilot flies the plane, but pilots train continuously in manual flight precisely so the skill doesn't atrophy. They maintain the capability to take over. So ask yourself, if your reviewers had to work without the model tomorrow, could they? If not, your oversight is already gone. So let's pull this chapter together because these ideas carry through everything ahead. First, govern is cross-cutting, not sequential. It's the environment the other 3 functions operate inside. If you take it as step 1 and tick it off, you've misread the diagram entirely. Second, no maturity tiers, and that's deliberate. Profiles replace scores because risk lives in context, not in process count. A current profile and a target profile with the gap as your program. That's a better question than what level are we? Third, and if you remember nothing else, remember this. AI is socio-technical. The model is the easy half. The data, the humans, the organization, and the society around it are the system too. Test only the model and you've tested a fraction. Fourth, risk is created upstream, at the whiteboard and in the data, and discovered downstream, in production. Move your governance earlier. And fifth, human oversight needs capability, authority, and time. Without all 3, it's theater. Now, if you want a detailed, structured course with role plays, quizzes, and practice tests on this topic, our Udemy course link is in the description. Do subscribe to the channel if this is landing well for you. And the YouTube playlist link is in the description too, which gives you every video in this series in order. Next, we look at what AI risk actually does to people. See you there.